What's up, Rockstars? Today I'm going to be covering the top 10 controversies of 2021. Board games were in turmoil this year. There was a lot to pick from, but I distilled it down to 10. Thank you to my channel sponsor, Into the AM. As a company that believes hard work and a great product is a proper way to conduct business, I am delighted to have them as part of the channel. They have some of the coolest graphic t-shirts around and an absolute best fit and feel that has continually exceeded my expectations. With new shirts arriving all the time and other products like boxers, hats, and even a monthly shirt club, I wholeheartedly recommend them to you. Check out the link in my description of this video for an exclusive 10% off everything they sell. Now, as always, a huge shout out to my patrons and YouTube members. It is through their financial support that this channel is possible. The coverage that I do and the way I do it, which you are about to see, which we're about to go over, is thanks to them. They provide the freedom for me to be able to cover what I want to cover and say what I want to say and how I actually feel without fear of repercussions from companies, because I am independent from them and instead rely on you guys. So thank you so much for allowing this channel to be community driven. And with that out of the way, a quick word of warning is that I'm going to be covering controversies. You clicked on a video that says controversies in big lettering, so be prepared for some controversial subjects. Let's all be adults and discuss civilly. In fact, I'm going to end on a really good note, I feel, and probably the most important thing. So if nothing else, before you comment, if you're not going to make it through the whole video, skip to the end and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, and then comment. Thank you so much. All right, now let's go ahead and start easy. Let's just ease into this, right? Okay, so this was actually interesting. This was Lazy Squire Games came out with Wild Ascent Levon Rising. It was like an kind of like an expansion and change and direction to Wild Ascent, in that it took the Wild Ascent gameplay and added a whole lot of narrative around it and stuff like that. But another thing they wanted to do was bring all of their stuff together. So they had Storm Sunder, they had Wild Ascent. They wanted it to look similar, both in art, both in miniatures, and also in the actual world. So they kind of changed some sculpts and stuff like that. Additionally, before they were kind of going with Archon, who did their like unicast resin minis that are a little bit smaller and are mostly designed by them. And instead now they are using, I think, Lompak now, and they are doing some fantastic miniatures, but they wanted to scale them up to match Storm Sunder and then also change them to better thematically match Storm Sunder. So what you had was, and this launched like before a lot of people even got their original Wild Ascent. So suddenly there was a new Wild Ascent campaign out. This was their third Kickstarter. They'd already done Wild Ascent, they'd already done Levon Rising, and they delivered none of it for a lot of people. And now they're also saying, not only is this a new version, but also we changed the scale. So if you get the new expansion to the game you don't have yet, it's not going to match in the scale. But don't worry, you can pay us $100 and get an updated scale, so then it'll all match. Now, that obviously is a super complex thing, because at one point, the creators are wanting to do what their creative vision is. And I am a big supporter of that. You guys know that. I want the creators to do what they want to be able to do. But at the same time, backers need to feel rewarded and feel like they have something great. And you gotta always be conscious of the person actually paying you and how they feel about it and how that affects brand image. So it's a complex thing, which is why it's controversial, which is why it made it to this list. But it's still a mild one. Well, again, we're going to ease into it. But yeah, it's a complex issue. And you can see both sides of it. I think both sides have valid reasoning behind it, of course. But at the end of the day, a whole bunch of people saw a campaign launch for an expansion to a game they didn't have, and in a scale that didn't accommodate what they just bought. Essentially what they felt was invalidating what they had already paid for and had yet to receive. So just a messy, icky situation kind of in general for both sides, actually. But anyway, yeah, so that was that. Next up, we have Batman, The Dark Knight, and them using miniatures that are pretty much the ones we found in Batman Gotham City Chronicles. Now, they actually used the same person doing the sculpt. It's a different style because it's like a comic book style. And The Dark Knight, if you haven't seen that comic book or the graphic novel that encapsulates them all and stuff like that, very unique art style for sure. And I think the minis capture that style very well. But as you can see, there was some reuse of some things, right? Obviously, this was taken and then modified to match this. Now, there are differences, of course, right? I mean, like this right here, this fold isn't there. right? And obviously the foot is angled up more, and the hand that's not holding something has fingers open, and obviously the face is completely different and swapped sides, and the clothes and the waist shape, but in general you can tell this was taken to make this. Right? Like, you can tell this just very much the case. And it wasn't just like one thing either. Like, there were several things like the legs on this guy here, you can see are pretty much the exact same with all the creases where you would think they would be. And granted, I mean, creases happen around the same time, but even the pose, right? The leg angled here, the leg, like, it's super exact. And even how this fits over it, right? And how it has the 3 buttons, and like, there's a lot of similarities. So yeah, when you see stuff like this, it was just kind of rough. Now, there's, again, controversial. There are pros and cons. Nothing is actually really original, right? It's all just inherently created by stuff that we make based off of our past experiences, based on what we like, based on technology. So if you think about it, both of these miniatures are from companies that want to do as single of a cast as possible, so they're fairly flat. So there's only so many dynamic ranges you can get while being flat, right? And, you could do this or you could do this, but at the end of the day, you can't do a whole lot more, right? And so there are constrained by that. There's a lot going on there, right? So you can appreciate stuff like the tie that's out and separated versus a bow tie and stuff like I get it, right? And I understand it. It's just normally us as consumers especially don't see it that exact, where it's the same sculptor doing the same IP in the same year, like covering pretty much the same kind of minis with the same character. Like, it's just like, okay, well, we're a bit exact now. So that was definitely something that I don't think any of us liked to see. And the moment you see it, you can't unsee it, of course, as well. So there's that too. But again, overall mild. Let's keep going. Let's talk about VAT. Now, if you are in America, you can just pat yourself on the back and say, yeah, I know we hate taxes, so we just don't even do them. I have never gotten sales tax, by the way, on any Kickstarter I've ever backed. None of the pledge managers have charged me tax. So maybe I need to be on the lookout for that. Maybe I'm just lucky here in Idaho. I don't know. But I feel if they start charging me tax, I might have to dump some tea in a river, perhaps. I don't know. Anyway, jokes aside, VAT is a value-added tax for a lot of European countries and actually other countries as well. It's not just Europe, though I'm going to focus on Europe just because they complain a lot, which I can understand. It's huge. As you can see, $100 extra on that just for that. What was controversial about this is you never saw this before. And obviously there was some sketchy stuff going on about it too. It wasn't just that they were eating the cost. In other words, it wasn't just that they were making $100 less per European backer than like an American backer. That was not necessarily the case. There was some sketch about manufacturing cost and all this other kind of stuff on how they categorized it, how they shipped it and imported it to essentially avoid VAT for the most part, so that you didn't have to pay it. And people who were backing it pretty much assumed it was, but it never was covered or anything like that. So now suddenly they had to add it on there and nobody was able to do that. So suddenly you had backed all these games and then suddenly you got all these like $100 plus ads to it where suddenly it was way more expensive. This was in the same year where the shipping and handling fees became really, really big over the course of the year. Like, it got expensive. So suddenly people in Europe are just not backing as many games. And I can't blame them. It's expensive. I mean, this is an expensive hobby. But then there's just like, okay, that's just not worth it. Especially because anything that comes into retail suddenly is a better deal because you avoid the shipping and you avoid the VAT. So even if you like buy the retail and then like pay scalper prices for the Kickstarter exclusives if you can't get those, it's still sometimes a better deal if you're in that situation. So this whole VAT switcheroo thing, where essentially a whole bunch of companies got caught with their pants down and had to quickly pull them up and charge their backers that they had already charged this extra fee that they weren't expecting, it was bad. People were angry, and I cannot blame any of you. That is, it's a terrible situation to be in. That being said, what is the company going to do, right? Admit, oh yeah, we were just, sneaking it by. We were just lying about how much it costs and doing all these other things to get it through. Well, no, of course not. They can't do that. And it's not like they can just eat $100 per pledge. I mean, the profit margins on these board games are not that much. I talk about big board game companies, stuff like that, but it's not like any of these guys are Apple, okay? Like, the profit margin is not that high. It really isn't. You can make some good money and be successful as a company making board games. But it's an expensive product to make. It really is. That's why it costs as much as it does. It's expensive. So anyway, yeah, that really sucked for a lot of people. That was a big one for months. That was like the hot topic. Moving on, we have banned from Gen Con. This is an interesting one. So this is Jeff Berggren from the Gaming Goat. He was the CEO there, and he got kicked out of Kickstarter and said, nope, you can't be here. His company was able to stay there. His booth was able to stay there. Him as a person was not. Now, there was a lot of focus on this frog here, supposedly making an okay sign, and some silliness and pettiness and hurt feelings on both sides. But the problem is that this guy, as an acting CEO of a board company, reacted in a very bad way. He had like a picture of Kermit the Frog with an AK-47 on his Facebook. It was like dealing with a middle school. Like, I have a teenager, right? I have a 12-year-old daughter and a 15-year-old son, and it felt like dealing with them. I was like, that's something they would do to like get at their sibling or some petty crap like that. This is going to be a theme throughout, I think, the next few ones, as I talk about the maturity of the industry. Coming from the video game side of things, where I remember decades ago when like video games were first like becoming a thing, really, right? And they had to find their footing, and they were very immature in a lot of ways. You think of the old like Lara Croft games, for instance, as a great example of thinking you're mature by being immature, right? It's what kids do. Right. I view that as like the teenage years of the video game industry, whereas now they're kind of in their like 30s, 40s, kind of more bitter and disgruntled, but also a little bit more mature about some subjects and representation and all that kind of stuff. Right. And so if you think about Lara Croft now in video games, if you haven't seen it, she's just a normal lady, and Lara Croft on the PS1, a little bit different. And I'm not going to go into like Leisure Suit Larry and stuff like that. But either way, that industry matured. And I feel like the board game industry, based off how the people running it, based off some of the stuff we talk about, or some of the stuff we won't talk about, or some of the stuff we're scared to talk about, is very much in that like pre-teen era where suddenly some of these subjects make us feel awkward and put us red in the face. And, oh no, we just don't want to talk about that. We don't want to even touch that or cover it or anything like that. Right. So that's kind of where we're at. And sometimes having CEOs act like a 12-year-old does that. So anyway, this was a big thing because it was very politicized because of this little image thing, but that wasn't really the thing. The thing was how he acted when somebody brought something up, right? I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, I'm sorry, you feel offended. It wasn't intentional. I apologize. But instead they make a joke about it and double down on that and double down on that and go to ridiculous levels and then get banned from Gen Con. So there's that. So yeah, that happened. Welcome to 2021. Next up, we have Peterson Games. I did a whole hit piece, as what a lot of you call this, make games, not campaigns, for Peterson Games. If you don't know what happened, essentially, in the same time that they're releasing 4 different games on GameFound, they also say, oh, by the way, you guys are not going to get your product until we do this deal elsewhere for a retail deal so we can pay for you to have your product because we don't have any money. We're like selling apartment complexes that we own and crap like that. And like essentially they're saying we have no money as a company. We can't deliver your stuff, but we are going to make a good deal. And then you will get your stuff eventually once we're able to do that. The problem is this isn't one campaign they haven't delivered, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. It is insane how many they have not delivered. And this is from a guy who runs campaigns for energy drinks and rocks, I'm not kidding, and board games and single minis and everything in between. Like, he just throw everything on Kickstarter and then hopefully you can make up the money and catch it elsewhere. It's obviously a case of somebody who loves to design games. I think Peterson loves to design games. It's obvious he does. And I bet he does a great job at a lot of it. Now, I don't think anybody can necessarily nail down 40 or I think he's had about 40 Kickstarters. It's a lot. Either way, like A+s, knock it out of the ballpark. But I imagine the majority of them are quite good. I've been tempted by a lot of them in the past. But it goes to show that just because you're a good game designer doesn't mean you're a good businessman, if that makes sense. And sometimes running a business is different than making a game. I think of like Star Citizen. Sorry I mentioned it. I know that's a sore subject for a lot of you guys, but it's true, right? Obviously people don't understand what scope creep is. A basic management thing that any like actual good business manager, whether it's, a Six Sigma guy or a lean guy or, whatever, people who actually know what they're doing when it comes to running a business, running teams, knows how to guard against stuff like that. And then there's the creators who are just passionate about making things. And so you want to make all the things and make it perfect and do all this. And then you either never release the product or, you know what I'm saying? Like, you need both, right? So I think Sandy Petersen needs to work for another company or find a good business partner, my opinion. But I do hope sincerely that everybody gets their game and that they love it and that it's fantastic and it's the best game you've ever played. And I mean that. I would love for it to be somebody's favorite game. That sounds awesome. I don't want people to not get games. I don't want a company to suffer or anything like that. But I want you guys to be safe in your backing, more knowledgeable, know what's going on, know the risks you take, and know what you're getting into. And so that's why I cover stuff like this. And again, this was a big deal. This was a very common theme throughout. PGC Games kept coming up and kept having issues. So yeah, that was the thing. Okay, Kickstarter changing the rules. Speaking of spamming campaigns, Kickstarter, if you didn't know, covers more than just board games. In fact, board games are about 30% of the pie when it comes to what Kickstarter makes and the, how much money they get. The rest of the stuff, like video games, electronics, inventions, all this other kind of stuff, art and stuff like that, is atrocious. It's bad. If you guys, I cover stuff like this, oh my gosh, Petersen Games might not deliver it, but that wouldn't even be news if I was covering electronics, for instance. If we were covering just somebody making a little gadget on Kickstarter, 50% of the time, you're not going to get the product at all. 30% of the 50%, you're not even gonna get what you'll get something, but it'll be late and it won't be anything like what you wanted and it'll be crap and it won't actually work and it's fake and there are so many scams and so many failed deliveries in video games and electronics and gadgets and just building things. It's bad. It's really bad. And so Kickstarter has to cover all of that. And so what they do is they made these rules saying you can't launch multiple campaigns until you deliver the other ones. First of all, you have to get in good standing, which we provide you, and that's based off your communication with your backers, how you run your campaign, and the fact that you've delivered 4 of them in the same category. And only then, once we allow you to, you can run 3. And if you have any more than 3 outstanding, you cannot launch another one. Well, because it's Kickstarter and covers everything. Well, they're making rules mostly for that because board games are doing great. They really are. You have companies like Mythic Games that are actually delivering, 4 or 5 campaigns a year, right? I mean, they're launching about that many too, so they constantly have stuff outgoing, but they're actually delivering stuff. Even Petersen Games for a long time has delivered ton of games. They really have. Now they've launched a ton too, but either way, a bad case scenario like Petersen Games still is better than most of what I just discussed in other categories. So board games are quite good. However, when they make a rule for that, they make a rule for everything because they're not singularly focused. And so they made this rule and now games suddenly can't, you gotta make games, not campaigns now, right? Or go to Game Founder, Indiegogo, or whatever. That's a whole other thing. And I'm not going to go into that meta part of it. However, this was a big deal for a lot of companies that it seemed to have sprung up on them, to be honest, because there was even some late stuff where we were going to be on Kickstarter, but then it swapped to GameFound suddenly. So we all know why that happened, right? So very big deal for sure. IDW Games left. They said no more games. Now, again, this is kind of one of those things where games are not the whole thing. IDW is a big publishing company and they have a lot of comics and stuff like that. And the comic book industry, if you didn't know, has been through the ringer. They have really struggled. And I could launch a whole nother channel to discuss perhaps why a lot of that is the way it is. I think some of it is because they just turned to crap. I think some of it is for a multitude of reasons. But anyway, so IDW has an issue with a big thing of theirs. And so what they're wanting to do is just focus on their core. And I can totally understand that. Because at the end of the day, even though they were successful on Kickstarter, making board games and making money and getting high funding values and delivering all that, The profit margins are not the same. Again, it is expensive and complex to make these games with hundreds of pieces in them and deliver them to thousands of people in countries across the entire globe around the same time. Yeah, it's complex. It's a big undertaking. So I can understand saying, you know what? No. So they canceled Metal Gear Solid. They let go of a lot of their developers and they said, okay, we're going to deliver what we've done and then we're done. We're good to go. We're leaving, right? And, I can understand that. I really can. But, still, it's big news because they had, like I said, they were going to do a Metal Gear Solid board game. Why didn't we get that? That would have been freaking cool. That being said, hopefully we can get it at some other time. Maybe just not through IDW. That'd be pretty neat. Okay, next up, we have Prison Architect being canceled from the get-go. Okay, so this is where we're, again, getting a little bit more political here, but essentially there was a select small group of people, and yes, any thread I've ever seen on Board Game Geek is actually just a small group of people. It's just a handful of people that are like very vocal about it and care about stuff, or they wouldn't be online discussing it, right? But they found a lot of offensiveness from, essentially, they felt it was like glorifying, like for-profit prisons in America, which have a multitude of problems and stuff like that. Now, this is again where I kind of feel like the video game industry has matured a little bit more than the board game industry when it comes to talking stuff like this, right? Like for instance, these people here, right? And so they say that, okay, it's different because as long as you do something that's terrible alone, it's fine. But if you do something terrible around a board game table, then it's not fine, which I don't agree with, but whatever, that was them kind of fumbling around why it's okay here and not here. But a lot of what they talked about is stuff like, hey, we purposely made it to where the skin color was all, like dynamic range. And I feel like that's unfortunate. As somebody, again, who comes from understanding what Paper Please is about and stuff like that. And if you don't know, seriously, Google this. Google Paper Please, and you'll see what I'm talking about, where video games can tackle some tough subjects. And we've seen a little bit of that in board games, right? Like this War of Mine, which, again, based on a video game, is covering tough subjects, right? Like, you do some terrible things in this War of Mine in a board game. So obviously that argument isn't true, right? Obviously you can have board games where you are doing in awkward situations that make you feel uncomfortable, that make you feel bad even. And that's what's great. It encourages conversation to tackle the subject. That's why movies are able to do terrible things, right? I was just being told about a Netflix movie I might go see, or not go see, to my living room, I guess, that involves like people preying on the elderly. And like that's a real thing. That's a legit thing. And they made a movie about it for entertainment, but it's not just entertainment, right? Entertainment and it can be an art form and can encourage good conversation and good discussions. And so to avoid that and be like, oh, that's that preteen kind of, oh man, you're going to talk about adult things. I don't know. Let's pretend that doesn't exist. And I feel that's unfortunate. I think Prison Architect, the board game, would have been a fantastic way to tackle some of those stuff in disguise as entertainment. Because at the end of the day, that's the best way to do it. It's that slow and steady introduction to stuff like that. Not in your face, not all about it, not obvious, not preachy, but also not avoiding and pretending it doesn't exist and just not doing it. Right? That's almost a missed opportunity. So I'm kind of bummed about that. Not because it's what didn't look my kind of game. I care about this industry. I run a YouTube channel on this junk, okay? So I'm busy recording this after midnight for you guys because I care, okay? And I would love to see the industry start to progress to where they can tackle tough situations more, be more comfortable talking with each other, especially around a board game, especially in person, with those close to us about sensitive subjects, while still having fun. It's okay. It's done in every other form of media. Music does it. Magazines do it. Movies do it. Video games do it. Board games don't. That's unfortunate. My opinion. Okay, but either way, some people were very like, you shouldn't ever make money off this, and this is a terrible thing. Just let it be a video game that's very popular with many people, I guess. Okay, so then you have the safe haven thing. This was a poor wording. Isaac did eventually apologize in his next update, though he did take a while because he just kept with the update schedule, so I think it's once a month. Either way, for a long time this just sat there, which was unfortunate. I wish he would have made a statement more publicly, more quickly. It would have cooled down, I think, a lot of people. But essentially what it is that he talked about hiring a person to make sure that he's not being insensitive to different cultures and stuff like that, especially if there's like, allegories or something like that, or parallels and stuff like that. Now, as a dude like this, I don't even think about this most of the time, but as somebody that might go through those situations a lot, that you could be triggered to that, right? It's kind of like, for instance, I bought a car, and after I bought that car, I felt every single person on that road, every time I went out, I saw somebody have my car. I was like, that's my exact same car. Oh, why, they're everywhere. Well, they weren't actually everywhere. It's just, or they weren't like more prominent because I bought a car. It's just, I'm noticing them more because I'm aware of it, right? It's kind of like, learning a new word and then hearing it all the time. Same kind of thing. So I can understand that. And I'm not going to like dive into the intricacies of how that works. I just know that some people notice things, whereas some people don't. Just plain and simple. Okay. So with that in mind, he was like, well, I might not notice things and I might actually do stuff. So I want to hire that. So he kind of talked about that, and that's fine. But then towards the end, he essentially alluded to the fact that if you didn't like that he did this, he would be fine refunding you money because you don't want board games to be for everyone. And that's that highlighted part that I'm showing right here. That was kind of the like, I don't know if like people could be concerned about that for other reasons. I mentioned the Dragon Age Origins, I think I mentioned, where again, it's a video game covering tough subjects while entertaining. So you go and meet these dwarves that are underground, and the problem is they're missing a king and they need a new king, and there are two people, politically charged group camps, you can think Republican, Democrat, whatever, conservative, liberal, whatever, that might take charge, and essentially you get to pick who gets to be in charge. Now, one of the people is all about, including other cultures and interacting with the rest of the world, and actually, opening up trade and getting dwarves out of the mountain and among other people, and being more accepting of the different castes, like a caste system and stuff like that. But he's also a murdering liar, terrible person who will kill people to get the political advantage he wants, stuff like that, and it. So he's a bad person. Other hand, you have this other dwarf that hasn't killed anybody, well, I guess that of, but either way, like, he seems very kind and very loving towards, his kind and stuff like that, and isn't backstabbing and all this other kind of stuff. Seems much more righteous, but he's also very conservative, essentially wants to close off the mountain and keep and encroach on the caste system more. He thinks that's how dwarves should live, and neither of them are actively trying to be like bad people, but both of them are bad. So then you have to pick, okay, do you want the guy who's going to close them all up and have them not interact with anybody else and enforce the caste system more and introduce like all these slaves and stuff like that, or the murderer that won't do that? And you have to pick. And that's the problem. You got two crappy decisions, now pick. And it makes you think, it makes you discuss, it makes you weigh options, and where you're thinking about this in your head. And it's fantastic to cover that. So people might read this and be concerned that you won't touch that because it involves slavery. Right? Because obviously there were slaves and castes and different tiers of people, and you could easily, say, oh, well, the slaves of dwarves are just like the slaves of like South in America or something like that. You could easily do that, right? And then be like, nope, don't want to do that. So that was the concern. So the issue was that him kind of assuming that, if you wanted a refund, you must just hate people don't want them to, and it just wasn't the case. And he later apologized. I didn't mean to allude to that. It just was worded badly. But either way, this was a huge thing. This was massive. And of course, I got in the weeds of it, and I don't speak well. I probably misspoke here again too, and I do apologize. I love everybody. I really do. I don't show a lot of hate towards people. I think people are great, so I shouldn't even have to explain that, but it's the internet and people like to assume everybody's like Hitler or something. I don't know. So anyway, that was a big deal, and I think it was that big of a deal mainly because it was Frosthaven, and that's a huge thing, right? Everybody loves Gloomhaven. Everyone's excited about Frosthaven, and so we're like all excited about this game, and then suddenly it's like, oh, now there's this awkwardness where some people are upset and some people aren't, and why are you upset? Well, maybe you should be upset. Maybe you shouldn't be upset. You don't understand me. I don't understand you. Life. We don't understand each other, and ideally we just talk and we start to understand each other and we listen. Okay, so that's the big deal, which leads me to my Board Game Geek Sucks video. So with all of this happened every single time something like this happened. Gaming Goat CEO gets banned from Gen Con. Oh my gosh, okay. And now there's a Board Game Geek thread where there's like heavy moderation and, posts being removed, so that literally it's unusable. It literally is. If you go and you try to read what people talked about for the Gen Con thing or for the Frosthaven thing or anything like that, what you're going to see is you can't even follow the conversation. It's literally illegible. There's just nothing left. 70% of the stuff is gone because you can't even be dismissive. In other words, if somebody says, I think this is an issue, you can't say, I don't think it is an issue. You can't say that at all, regardless of what was posted, just because that's dismissive and they don't even want that there, which is fine. Board Game Geek can do what it wants. But again, I find it so unfortunate for the industry that our biggest website for board games, the place where everybody would go to discuss things like this that need to be discussed, need to be talked about. Now, I get people being mean and people being rude and not wanting that. I do understand that people have different tolerance levels for that. I have a pretty high tolerance level for it. I think if somebody wants to be mean and rude online, they can just look like an idiot and we can all be like, dude, you're a jerk, right? As opposed to hiding the fact that they're a jerk. My opinion. But a lot of people don't have as tough skin as, I run a YouTube channel. People say all sorts of terrible things about me. It's whatever. Some people have tougher skin, some people don't, and that's fine too. And as a company, they can do whatever they want. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't work as a tool for us to grow as an industry because we can't actually talk about the hard stuff. And I think that's unfortunate. I think you should nurture a culture of discussion. So I have here a quote, and this is what I'm ending on because that way, if you skip to this, hopefully before you comment, you can at least read this and just realize where I'm coming from here. The goal of an argument is not to be right. It's to get it right. In other words, it's not a I'm right, you're wrong, and you're right and I'm wrong. It's I feel this way. I think it's this way. Now, why do you feel otherwise? That's kind of interesting. I never even thought, that's the attitude you need to have in a discussion. If you've seen a proper debate, especially, I'm not talking like American presidential debate, right? I'm talking like an actual, two people who have, two philosophers having a debate, a legit one. It's not really arguing in that it's like they're angry at each other or they think each other are stupid or idiots, something like that. You see that too. But a legit debate is honestly just two ideally really smart people talking about something they know a lot about and discussing it, trying to get to the root of it. Okay, I think this, I think that. Well, why do you. And so really at the end of the day, it's unfortunate we don't have a place for that. And I wish we did, and I hope we do in the future. I don't know what it looks like or where it's at. Maybe Board Game Geek will allow it eventually and we can actually have civilized discussions about some of these things that board games are starting to kind of grow into. Again, we're turning into teenagers. We're preteens now. We're a little awkward, but eventually we're going to be able to discuss heavy stuff and have differences of opinions, to talk about differences of opinions and having that be in our narrative story or built into the mechanics or, stuff like that. There are video games that have a hard mode where it changes your skin color to black. Can you imagine a board game doing that? That would be awesome. I think that'd be fantastic. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. Why is that a thing? Sounds great. So a lot of controversy, a lot of politicalness, a lot of craziness was in 2021. But I am here to cover it for you guys and take the hits and take the mean comments and the people saying I'm a terrible person and all that. Because at the end of the day, I want to have a discussion about this stuff because I care about the industry. And I hope that some of you do too. If you appreciate me being able to cover these things, where a company would be like, yeah, no, don't advertise my game on this video. Well, I wasn't doing that anyway. So if you appreciate that level of independence or the fact that I do try to tackle these right or wrong, sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong, sometimes I change my mind or I learn new things. It happens. We all grow as people, and I hope to continue to grow myself in 2022. But if you do appreciate it, and you can, there is a link down below to Patreon. This isn't a beg or anything like that. I just want to stress how the independence benefits you guys. So if you do appreciate that, there is a link down below. But if not, that's fine too. I do honestly am glad you're here. I'm very happy about it. A like on the video does just as well. It lets me know that I am doing something right. Even a comment, maybe countering some of the mean ones that might be down there saying, hey, I appreciate you trying to tackle these tough subjects. Agree or disagree, I'm glad you're having this conversation. I hope to have a conversation with you in the future. I would love that. That would make my day. It makes all of this effort worth it for me. So Guys, have a great rest of your day. There's a lot more coming up. I got some fun top 10s. This is like the worst one. Everything else is like my top 10 anticipated and my top 10 this and all. You know, it's the end of the year. We're celebrating all that and looking forward to a better 2022, hopefully. I hope next year when I try to make this video, I can't think of 10. I thought of like 15, but this year, hopefully 2022 is better. All right, take care, guys. Have a wonderful day. Bye.